Post-1971 debacle, it was Bhutto who picked up the pieces. Donning the populist garb, Bhutto sought to bring about the biggest turnaround the ill-fated country had ever seen. He would restore democracy, frame a constitution, and establish the rule of law so that people would never again be under the capricious will of any individual. Pakistan was facing a severe economic crisis. The loss of East Pakistan had administered a rude shock to the West Pakistani economy. A way had to be found to restructure trade and find alternative markets for West Pakistani goods, 50% of which had been absorbed by the Eastern Wing. In dire need of foreign exchange, the government agreed to the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank conditions for debt rescheduling and devalued the rupee from rupees 4.75 to rupees 11 to $1. Bhutto's answer was populism. The populist buzzword of social justice was enshrined in the PPP's motto: Islam is our faith, democracy is our polity, socialism is our economy, all power to the people. This translated into nationalization of 10 categories of industries for the benefit of the people of Pakistan, a decision that could not be challenged in any court of law. Thus began Pakistan's experiment with socialism. In April 1973, Bhutto managed to get parties to agree to a consensual constitution, which was Islamic and federal. On the face of it, the 1973 constitution was sensitive to the needs of the smaller provinces. They were given equal representation with Punjab in the Senate, the upper house of a two-chamber federal legislature. But the upper house did not have the requisite legislative and financial powers to redress the numerical disadvantages of the non-Punjabi provinces in the lower house. The chances of a healthier federal union, however, were dashed not so much by structural constraints of the system, but by honoring the constitution in breach rather than observance. There were 7 amendments to the constitution between 1973 and 1977, all of them at the expense of the judiciary or individual rights. The most contentious of these amendments was the Second Amendment, which declared that Ahmadis were non-Muslim for the purposes of law and constitution. This had to do with international politics as much as PPP's domestic challenges. Projecting their Wahhabi ideology with a newfound confidence, the Saudis called for the excommunication of Ahmadis and began denying them Hajj visas. Delighted by the turn of events, the Jamaat-e-Islami and like-minded Islamist parties joined a group which called itself the Khatm-e-Nabuwat to reopen the controversy to declare Ahmadis non-Muslims. The basis had been laid by the 1973 constitution, which provided the legal and political machinery for the implementation of Sharia as defined by the orthodox religious clergy. Anxious to win strong endorsement for the constitution, Bhutto made the first of his many cynical concessions to the so-called religious lobby, effectively a gaggle of parties with a political agenda to assume state power by harping on all things Islamic. Under the new constitutional provisions, a special oath had to be taken by the President and the Prime Minister stating that they were Muslims who believed in the finality of Muhammad's prophecy and firmly denied the possibility of any prophet after him. In a defining moment for Pakistan, the National Assembly unanimously passed this amendment to the Constitution on September 7, 1974, pronouncing the Ahmadis as a minority. Any definition of Muslim by the state was bound to throw open the floodgates of bigotry against smaller and more vulnerable sects. Declaring Ahmadis non-Muslims laid the basis for an exclusionary idea of citizenship, undermining the Pakistani nation-state's commitment to equal rights of citizenship. Things did not quite go as Bhutto planned or expected. The ramifications of his decision soon became apparent as the Prime Minister came under increasing pressure from religio-political parties. Looking to convert their victory on the Ahmadi issue into definite electoral advantage, they demanded immediate institution of an Islamic system of government. In 1977, a coalition that ironically included parties of both the right and the left demanded precisely that as part of their election manifesto. Known as the Pakistan National Alliance, the 9-party combination had nothing in common except hatred for Bhutto and Bhuttoism. A confluence of interests from the religious right to ethnic separatists, bankrolled by private business, set out to challenge the PPP. 1977 elections were widely condemned as being rigged because PPP won as many as 136 seats against PNA's 36 seats, which was beyond all expectations. Yet, of the 17 million votes cast in 1977 elections, the PPP got 10 million and PNA bagged 6 million. The margin between votes cast and seats won was not unusual in a system of parliamentary government. But 93% of the seats in Punjab stretched the limits of credulity and hinted at the culpability of the civil administration. The provincial assembly polls that happened later were so massively rigged as to suggest a bureaucratic conspiracy of killing the party with the kindness of an overwhelming majority. Forced into negotiating with the PNA, Bhutto cynically agreed to Islamize his government. On April 17, he announced the introduction of Sharia within 6 months and imposed an immediate ban on alcohol, gambling, and nightclubs. All of this backfired. Meanwhile, there was violence in Balochistan, where hundreds of protesters had been killed and over 1,000 injured amid widespread damage to both public and private property. Bhutto also fell foul of Jimmy Carter's administration in Washington. A strong proponent of nuclear non-proliferation, the new Democratic administration under Jimmy Carter was publicly opposing Pakistan's impending purchase of a nuclear processing plant from France. Henry Kissinger, the Secretary of State of the outgoing Ford administration, had also urged the Pakistani Prime Minister to drop the idea or at the very least delay matters. Upon failing to get the Pakistanis to cancel the French contract, the US Secretary of State warned that the new administration was bound to make a massive attempt to stop the sale and would like nothing better than to have somebody to make an example of. The outgoing American ambassador, who had become his personal friend, frankly told Bhutto to back down on his nuclear ambitions if he wanted to remain in power. In retaliation, Bhutto is alleged to have made overtures to Moscow, including an offer to allow the Soviets use of Pakistan's Makran coast. He was to pay the ultimate price. Where he miscalculated was in the choosing of a servile army chief in the vain hope of using his loyalty to ward off the one institution that had repeatedly undone elected governments in Pakistan with impunity. General Zia-ul-Haq gave the green signal for the military coup. Even if he did not act on American instructions as Bhutto alleged from his prison cell, the general's subsequent moves demonstrated that he had a definite agenda which had the endorsement of the military's top brass. The coup was challenged in the court by Nusrat Bhutto, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto's wife. Supreme Court accepted the petition initially. Relying on Asma Jilani's case, Mrs. Bhutto's counsel argued that military intervention was banned under Article 6 of the Constitution. Consequently, laws under which Bhutto and his colleagues had been detained were declared illegal on September 20, 1977, but Supreme Court, now under appliant Chief Justice Anwarul-Haq, rejected the petition in November, citing the doctrine of necessity. Legitimizing, therefore, the coup as a necessary step taken in the interest of the state and welfare of the people. Zia, however, wanted Bhutto eliminated altogether from the political scene. He found an accomplice in Justice Maulvi Mushtaq Hussain, who had a personal grudge against Bhutto. Bhutto was sentenced to death in a criminal conspiracy to murder. The judgment also questioned Bhutto's faith in Islam and said he was unfit to rule, stating that he lacked real belief in Islam, presumably because his mother was a convert from Hinduism. The 1973 Constitution's Islamic provisions had come a full circle. Bhutto's death sentence was upheld by the Supreme Court in a 4-3 verdict divided along provincial lines. All 4 judges in favor of sentencing Bhutto were Punjabis, while the opposing trio came from non-Punjabi provinces. If the original 9 judges had decided the case, the verdict would have gone in Bhutto's favor. The mercy petition was rejected by General Zia and Bhutto was hanged on April 4, 1979. Meanwhile, General Zia-ul-Haq began the project of Islamization. Even before Bhutto was executed, Zia-ul-Haq amended the constitution to establish Shariat benches to determine whether a law was repugnant to Islam. He also introduced stringent Islamic laws known as the Hudud ordinances, which specifically targeted women. Anyone accused of adultery, even in the case of rape, was liable to be stoned to death. Fornication itself became a criminal offense, liable to be punished with 100 lashes, and similar Islamic punishments were introduced for alcohol and other things. Meanwhile, elections were cancelled and postponed repeatedly. Pakistanis had to forget about elections, become pious Muslims, and defend their homeland against ungodly communists. If these actions would have made General Zia unpopular internationally, he was helped by the events in Afghanistan and Iran. In 1979, Iran underwent the Islamic Revolution and the Soviets occupied Afghanistan. An attack on Kaaba and Mecca was blamed on the US, which led to an attack on US Embassy in Islamabad. Evidence of state complicity, if not actual sanction, was the inactivity of both the police and the army as students ransacked the embassy, killing 2 Americans, including a Marine. Surprisingly, the Carter administration's reaction was muted. This was because of what was going on in the region. From the Pakistan Army's command's angle of vision, the Soviet occupation was a matter of global and not just regional concern. Recognizing that the West had no choice but to back the Zia regime, they saw a rare opportunity to end Afghan opposition to the Durand Line and exert influence in the former buffer state on its western border to gain strategic depth against India. This is where Pakistan's support of a transnational network of Muslim militants came in. General Zia thus went from being a pariah to a much feted ally of the United States, all the while postponing elections. Those elections were held in 1985 and brought to power the apparently feeble and pliant Muhammad Khan Junejo as Prime Minister. The Junejo government was ultimately dismissed by General Zia himself, who appointed a caretaker cabinet minus a Prime Minister while retaining chief ministers in the provinces. Had he lived, he might have continued his machinations, but on August 17, 1988, General Zia was killed in a mysterious plane crash with US Ambassador Arnold Raphael, American Defense Attaché Brigadier General Herbert M. Wassam, and a number of top Pakistani generals. The demise of General Zia-ul-Haq in the mysterious plane crash heralded a new chapter in Pakistan's political landscape. The military strongman who had ruled the country for over a decade was gone, and the nation faced a turning point. Amid the turbulence and uncertainty, Benazir Bhutto emerged as a prominent political figure. Her return from exile in 1986 had already stirred anticipation for her leadership. Following General Zia's death, elections were finally held in November 1988, marking the first time in over a decade that the people of Pakistan could exercise their democratic rights. Benazir Bhutto's Pakistan People's Party secured a significant victory in those elections, and she assumed the role of Prime Minister, becoming the first woman to lead a Muslim-majority nation. PPP's return to power signified a shift towards civilian rule and the revival of democratic governance in Pakistan, even as the country continued to grapple with complex political, social, and economic challenges.